Hey, I'm Taylor Dorsett, and this is the Professional Technical Interviewee. Technical interviews are hard, and every company does them differently. On this show, I interview engineering leaders to see what they look for in technical candidates, and then they perform a real technical interview with me. My guest today is Roosevelt Anderson. He's an engineering manager at Dividos and previously worked at Grainger, Jellyvision, and Amazon. We talked about the importance of asking questions in interviews, his approach to the take-home interviews, and work on a two-dimensional array problem during the technical portion. Well, Roosevelt, thank you for being here. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks. Glad you invited me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, to introduce, this is Roosevelt Anderson, currently an engineering manager at Dividos, previously engineering manager at Grainger, Jellyvision, an engineer at Amazon, and a whole slew of other places in the Chicagoland area, and soon to be relocating to Nevada area, right?
Yeah, I mean, Las Vegas, it's basically that Las Vegas area. So
yeah, cool. Well, welcome. Thank you so much. I have enjoyed, you've put a couple of blog posts out on LinkedIn, and part of the reason I wanted to reach out and have you on the show around how you hire and kind of your day-to-day life as an engineering manager. And I thought it was really interesting perspective that I think is useful for a lot of people, especially if you're in the situation of looking for a job or trying to start the job search. It can be difficult, right, to know what's going on the other side of the table, right?
yeah, I mean, honestly, like just, from things I've seen, since the pandemic, I probably need to, put another article about just general attitudes towards, job hunters and, it's a hot market. We all get that it's a hot market, with most recruiters reaching out to anybody who has an engineering background and technical skills. But at the same time, like, you can't expect companies to like lower standards, like things like, hey, make sure you have an up-to-date resume. Those core things. It's like, yeah, recruiters, want to move fast, companies want to move fast, but they still have standards that they have to uphold. And I think that's kind of one of the things getting lost with a lot of candidates I'm seeing these days as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'd love to touch on that. Can you introduce your team, yourself, give us a little background and
Yeah.
kind of your role?
Sure. Yeah, I'm Roosevelt Anderson. I'm an engineering manager at Dividos. I am the manager of the customer enrollment team, which is a brand new team at Dividos. We're hiring like crazy right now. So yeah, building up that team from scratch. Essentially, what my team's responsible for is, that the digital intake experience, when you first sign up to Dividos, getting your name, your insurance information, your prescriptions to kind of ship you your package. By the way, I should probably explain what Dividos is. Dividos is a online pharmacy that individually packs your prescriptions by time and day. So it's comparable, like PillPack is a competitor. So you get, a box, your 30 supply box of your prescriptions, you peel off, your 8 a.m. dosage, and then it's already separated out for you. So you don't have to go through, if you're taking, 4 or 5 medications, or if, you're taking care of somebody taking 4 or 5 medications, that can get complicated. So it just makes it one less thing you have to worry about, where it's like, okay, 8 a.m., here's your 8 a.m. dosage, here's your 12 p.m. dosage, and kind of go from there, just making the whole process easier of taking medication.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a great mission as well. I mean, anytime you get past 2 or 3 medications, right, all of a sudden it becomes very complicated to keep track of everything, right? Especially if you're on different schedules, right? So great. And what's the tech stack?
Right now it's AWS built on Python. So that's what one of the core systems are. We're building out a brand new system, so I don't know if we're going to keep that the same or change. I'm really one of those people who I don't care what it's written in, as long as the engineers agree that it's something that it's what they want to write it in, and that they can support it. So
Cool. Great. Well, maybe you have insight from both sides of the table here. If Davidos is a more recent move, but have you done technical interviews lately for your team or on your own side? I know engineering manager roles sometimes can be somewhat technical, right? But maybe you're doing less coding exercises.
I've been doing a lot of engineering screens. I actually have been doing evaluating some of the coding exercises as well. I think that, with just how I hire, the coding exercises, the method I prefer is, not always doing, okay, let's jump on a Zoom and, here's CoderPad and let's go. I'd rather do a take home exercise and then evaluate it later. We kind of talk through it. Just because, from my experience, there are people who are really, really good at, hey, let's jump on, like I can do a programming problem, let's jump on CoderPad. But those same people aren't good if I say, okay, here's a simple problem, build a simple service and, explain what you did.
Yeah.
And the thing is, like, it's a very, very simple thing to do, but depending on your level, it tells you different things about that person. The code that I'd expect from a junior engineer is going to be different than the code I expect from a senior engineer.
Yeah.
One example is I said, okay, I used to use it. I'm actually not retiring this question is, hey, I'm giving you some data, airport data. I want you to create two endpoints. First endpoint, just retrieves information about that airport.
Mm-hmm.
Second endpoint, I want you to calculate the distance between two different endpoints and return that distance.
Yeah.
So that seems like a very, very simple problem. So if you look at it, I mean, bare minimum, some people will, okay, yeah, create the endpoint, here you go. But it's about more than that. It's about, okay, is the code readable? Do you have, unit tests? Do you have integration tests? How are you storing the data? In the interview, we get, the one question I said, I go is I say, okay, take your service and scale it. How are you going to scale that? Because that problem is different, from working on, your individual Mac, as opposed to, okay, I want you to scale it for, 1 million people. How does that change the way that you code? And then it also tells you level too. So, I've had, senior engineers really fall down hard on this because, they won't do things like, they'll just deliver the code. No unit tests, no integration tests. It'll be very rudimentary on, how they implement things because they think, oh, it's easy. Like here, slapping this together and, I'm just going to deliver it to you. But it really shows, I mean, that shows me more about who you are as an engineer than if I said, okay, Taylor, let's fire up CoderPad and answer this question.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I mean, you get much more insight into how someone actually writes code versus I think the on the spot question answer type of interview, it's almost looking for a different thing, right? Like your ability to solve problems, but almost in this time box kind of artificial setting, right? Which is somewhat similar to solving a problem in, in your day-to-day life or in your day-to-day job, but it's still very different, right? Doing it on the spot in 30 minutes versus like, okay, I know today I have to solve this problem, right? And we have to talk through it, and you may have other people to work with, right? So very different types of things you're really screening for.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And the thing is, if you're going to do that, you have to be really, really experienced and really be good at evaluating the candidate, like picking the right question to ask somebody. Like for instance, like for me, I would never, like, some of the questions you get are like hardcore math problems, and it's like
Yeah.
you're thinking about the hardcore math, but yet you're not thinking about, how to solve the problem. A perfect example of this is, okay, I have a skyline of a city. Calculate the area of the buildings under the skyline. And like, for me, I'm like, that's insane. Like, why would I ever expect somebody to be able to do that in a 45-minute interview?
Yeah.
The other ones are, okay, well, I have this formula right here, and I want to make sure, we calculate slope. I'm like, at that point, just very, very simple questions.
Yeah.
For me. So, I mean, we'll see it like the second half of the interview, but like I lean on, something that's solvable, something that, it might not be a classical, algorithm question, but it should demonstrate, that you can be able to do, things like that you're competent in data structures, that particular things. And the thing is, the question, the type of question that I'm probably going to ask you, I've seen a lot of people fall into a trap because they think it's one way to solve it, but
Mm,
it's not. So
interesting.
those are some of the things you see. I've been seeing just when I've been doing this the past, been interviewing like 12, 13 years already. So
Yeah. Yeah, well, you've touched on a lot of this already, but what are you typically evaluating for? It seems like ability to actually solve problems, but also be able to produce code, right? That you would actually want to use in production. It seems like that's part of this, the idea behind the take home. But what else are you typically evaluating for during these technical interviews?
from a non-manager interview, it's literally, can they code? Can they understand? Can they take feedback? I think that's a big thing too. I've been gifted to been mentored by a lot of good people who've done like coding interviews. I had one of the guys that really kind of mentored me. His name's Eric Luke. If you've ever went through, he worked at Amazon. I'm not sure if he works there anymore. If you ever went through an interview with him, you might have the crappiest experience, might bomb the interview, but at the end, he makes you feel good because he's like, hey, you might not know this, but hey, let's go back and forth. Let's have a dialogue. Let's kind of talk through, how we could solve this and, kind of build on those types of things, as opposed to some other interviewers who are like, here's a question. Okay, it's 30
Yeah,
minutes, go.
yeah,
And kind of having that dialogue, because that's what it should be. It shouldn't be, can this person just answer this question? It should be, hey, can this person have that dialogue with the interviewer? Are they coachable? Are they taking the feedback? Are they taking the hints?
totally.
Are they even, if the question's ambiguous, the interviewer might not know this, and that might be something that the interviewer can take back to like the next time he does, and he can clarify, or he or she can clarify. And those are the types of things that when you're doing an interview like that, um, you definitely want to have. Like, during technical interviews, you it takes a long time to get good at them.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's a skill set for an interviewer to build, right? Is being able to actually be more collaborative and being able to coach and give feedback in ways that isn't, too damning for the interviewer, right? Or the interviewee. And something that I don't know, it's definitely difficult to be able to be receptive while feeling like, how do I, get out of the spiral of how this interview is going, right? And part of the reason, the whole idea around this show, right, is technical interviewing is hard. It does get easier as you practice, right, and the more you do it. But there's a huge chunk of the interviews on this show where I go, I don't really know how to do this, but let's learn from this, right, and kind of work through this, right. It's kind of learning in public. So,
Yeah.
yeah. Do you have a standardized system that you use when you're doing technical interviews? Like, does everyone get the same type of question, or does it change depending on the role and the position?
I mean, honestly, for the take home, I like to give everybody just the standardized question and evaluate the rubric, and have a rubric based on the level. And then I can say, okay, based off these things, I level this person as, a mid-career engineer. Okay, we're going for senior. Okay, we know we can't proceed for that. Or, this person, put out senior level code and we're hiring for senior. Let's proceed that way. On the like the one-on-one type interview questions, like normally it should be the question should be the same, for the most part, because mostly I'm interviewing mid-level to senior engineers. So that
Mhm.
question most of the time is, and this is how most companies evaluate, is the same. Is like,
Yeah.
can you solve it? Do you have the things, the toolkit to solve that or not? Where the differentiation comes in is, other parts of the interview. Okay, a mid-level to a senior engineer, there's going to be a gap there, and like how you solve architectural problems.
Mhm.
So it's part of the other pieces of the technical interview path that kind of determine level, in my book, and that I've seen done in the industry.
Yeah, I like having a standard rubric, right, that you use to actually grade people. I think that's really helpful and makes it much more, maybe results much more consistent than, I feel like this person was, X, Y, and
Yeah.
Z level. So that's good to see. Uh, how do you think in the past you've done in technical interviews? So do you feel like really strong, somewhere between, hated them?
It really, really depends on the interviewer. Like I said, I've I've had really, really good experiences, and I've had really, really bad experiences. One of the bad experiences I had was I went in for a role, and the role was I went in for one role, but they interviewed me for another higher role. It was a role I didn't want. So, we're getting the interview, and instead of saying, I actually went in and I said, I think there's a mistake. I think like you misleveled me. I didn't go in for this role. The interviewer, instead of saying, hey, we understand, we'll bring you back, to interview at this level, went in for 15 minutes telling me why I didn't qualify for that level of role.
Jeez.
And I'm like, and that has other complications because I'm like, okay, it was miscommunication, but this makes me just not want to work for your company either.
Yeah,
Like that's just a bad experience. And like I'm one of those people who is all about candidate experience
totally. Yeah.
around that. Like there might be a misunderstanding, but it's literally how those interviewers handle that misunderstanding, making sure you have empathy around that stuff. Um, and I've definitely had some really good interviews where it's like, I had an interview where they're like, hey, we're gonna have an hour to go through this coding question, and I finished it in like 15 minutes. They're like, oh, okay, I don't know what else to do, let's just talk. Because I mean at that point I had been doing so many technical interviews, and then also I mean like conducting them, and then also like doing them and prepping. So like that's a situation where there might be a problem in your process if somebody can finish your interview question in like 15 minutes if it's a higher level role or something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. It's, I don't know. There's no shortage of stories from my time in recruiting where interviews went sometimes really, really well, or really, really poorly. But a lot of the actual results of those came down to like, how was that situation dealt with, right? Was the candidate experience considered at all, or was it just, we'll send this person on their way, they were a no? Or was there actually some type of conversation where like, okay, we understand we've messed up, or maybe there's some poor expectation here, right? The candidate experience is something that I feel like can't be undervalued, because you have people that may interview with your company early on in their career, right? And maybe they're not a good fit for any role, but if they have a good experience, 2-3 years later, they might be a great fit for that same type of role, right? But if they had a terrible experience the first time around, they're not going to come back. Versus someone who's like, oh, I've always had it in the back of my mind, like since I interviewed there years ago, right? And it's almost like every interview is kind of it's not even a yes or no, it's yes or not right now, or no, right? There's potential
Yeah,
for them to come back around as long as it's a mutual agreement that this is a good potential fit, right?
yeah, definitely. Like the interview process, it's like you're not only interviewing the candidate is interviewing you too.
Yeah,
Because and that rings more true now in this environment than ever.
totally.
Because if you have if you give that candidate a bad experience, like you might say, hey, yeah, we think this guy's awesome, but I mean this person's awesome, but if they had a bad experience and it's like, I really don't want to work there.
Yeah.
I've had that happen to me too, where it was like, went in for it was multi-day interview. The interviewer on the second day didn't show up. Just like didn't show up, didn't let me in. I'm like, yeah, I'm done. I'm done with this company. Just kind of go back. The VP calls me. He's like, hey, let's, come on in. It's like, yeah, we're sorry about that. Let's fix it. But at the end, they offered me the job. But at the end, it's like that was still in my mind, where it's like
Yeah.
the candidate experience was so bad. And it's like this is how you treat a potential candidate. Like, how are you treating your employees
Yeah.
when it comes around to that type of thing?
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Do you have any type of standardized system or process you use when you're doing technical interviews yourself, that maybe you see a problem and you go, I don't know how to solve this, right? But what is your process to working towards some type of solution?
Ask questions about it. Just ask questions about what the interviewer is expecting.
Mhm.
Um, Usually what will end up happening is um it's like, do you want me to solve the problem, or do you want me to solve the problem the most optimal way?
Yeah,
Because a
interesting.
lot of the times, like, it's easy to just, go in and solve the problem, but it's like, do you want to do this in the most optimal way? Or, even when, I'll go into an interview and I say, okay, I know this problem. Here's how I would solve it in like a brute force way. Put it, at least get something down,
Yeah.
and then say, okay, how can I optimize this and change the code into something more optimal that you might be looking for. So that's usually my approach to things. Like, even if like it's something like right out of the blue, at least you've got something down and you can
Yeah.
begin talking through, okay, well, how can you optimize this stuff? And kind of going forwards from there.
Yeah, I found that sometimes you can even just say, like, I know we could solve this doing this, right? But I don't think that's an ideal solution, right? You don't even have to code it often, right? As long as you've thrown that idea out there, the interviewer goes, okay, I know they have a potential solution, but they want to find something that might be better, right?
Yeah, so the only caveat with that is make sure you get something down, because
Yeah.
that's what interviewers are evaluating on. It's like, a technical interview, if you say, okay, yeah, well, we talked for 40 minutes, but I don't have anything to show for it. But I think you got the right idea. That's a tougher sell to, the hiring manager and bar raiser that's saying,
Yeah.
okay, he had the solution, this is his first solution. And then we're kind of walking you interim. Here are the ideas that he had down for it. That person, had it, but, we kind of ran out of time. That's an easier sell to make, as opposed to, yeah, we just talked for 40 minutes.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Great point. Do you have any other tips or advice for folks going into technical interviews?
Um, you know, don't over prepare. That's the one of the big things I would think of. If you over prepare, you overthink.
Mm,
So I would just say, you know, make sure you're prepared, but just like don't over prepare. And usually what ends up happening is the last thing in your mind, try to adapt that problem to
mm.
it. I've seen that a lot. You have no idea how many interview questions I've given where like a person's like, oh, I'm gonna create, depth first search on this. It's like, okay, you're going to create a depth first search on a queue or an array. Okay, look, let's see how it works out. So you have those types of things too. So
Yeah, a great point. The last interview on this show, we were working through a problem, and someone said, "What would what approach would you use for this one for matching some type of matching algorithm?" And I said, "I mean, we could use like a priority based queue." And he goes, "We could use an array too." And I was like, "Yeah, that works." Great. Do you have any different advice for early career engineers? Maybe additional advice for folks who are just maybe searching for their first job or kind of in that first few years, right? Where I feel like sometimes you never quite know where the level of those questions are coming in at, right?
the only thing I would say is ask questions. Ask questions. Have that dialogue. Um, you might feel nervous and awkward, like not having silence. The interviewer also feels nervous and awkward about that silence too. So definitely just kind of talk through, just verbalize what you're thinking about, and that's what I would say. Just be very very verbal in these interviews.
Yeah, cool. Great. Well, before we move into our technical portion, any horror stories that you shared a little bit, right, of some awful interviews, but any maybe horror stories or good stories you want to share from your interviewing
Uh,
past?
let's see. As an interviewer or as an interviewee?
Either one, your pick.
Okay, so as an interviewer, one of the things. Oh, and here's a tip too. Don't be afraid to ask to use the bathroom.
Sure.
I literally had somebody during an interview just like literally go to the bathroom on themselves just because they were afraid to ask, because it
No way.
was, yeah, just because it was such, because these interviews, I mean, they get high stress, and it's just like you don't want that to seem you know to seem like you're inconveniencing somebody. But like that also kind of changed the way I start interviews too. Like I come like, hey, do you need water, do you need to use the bathroom before you go into it? Just
Sure.
because like I get that they're high stress situations, with a lot of these things. I think, just like I said, with some of the best interviews, for me, are, the ones where we have like a dialogue back and forth, with the interviewer. A lot of I'm an architecture nerd, so I love, just even if it's like, hey, I know I found this question, but like, hey, describe the architecture that you're looking for, or let's have a conversation about the architecture. And the one horror story I did have, I interviewed with a very large, well-known company, and the interviewer wanted something a specific way, and it was how that they were doing it. But I'm like, okay, but you could do it this way. No, that's not the right way. This is how we do it. I'm like, but that's not how a lot of people do it. There are multiple ways to tackle this problem in multiple tools. So yeah, I mean, those are some war stories from being an interviewer and interviewee.
Great. Well, we'll take a quick break here, and then we'll move into the technical portion. All right.
All right, sounds good.
Thank you for watching the first half of the Professional Technical Interviewee. The technical interview will be released 1 week from this episode, so be sure to subscribe to make sure you don't miss it. New episodes are released on the first 4 Thursdays of each month. Find us on YouTube at youtube.com/Taylor Dorsett, or on Apple Podcast or Spotify. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on new episodes. And remember, keep practicing.